Hi, I'm Maureen Gumringer, and today we are discussing our review of the year 2020 and our um, spiritual, psychological, and social dynamics of awakening for the coming year. Welcome to the God Squad.
My mind, I was kind of shocked how unconscious our representatives were when it came to the needs of the people and how unthinking they are when it comes to what's on the table of their constituents. They want to give the people a measly $600 for all the suffering and sacrifices they've had to make when it comes to the virus, when they have children who are hungry, when they have bills that are unpaid. They've watched people get evicted from their homes. And Mitch McConnell, McGreedy, who has millions and millions of dollars, primarily because his wife has all these big contracts with the Chinese government, yet he doesn't feel the need to give Americans more because basically he doesn't have the same needs as Americans. I'm stunned. I'm really stunned. And I'm stunned because I think the Democrats should have really gone at it a little bit more than they have. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I think that the senator from, what is it, Vermont?
Bernie?
Bernie Sanders did his thing and he stood his ground, and I appreciate that. And I would not have minded if he had kept it going for days, because I felt like I was surprised that our senator from New York, my mind slips me,
I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful here.
Schumer, Chuck
Mhm.
Schumer. I think he should have put up a better fight. I expected more from the people than what they gave. Um, you know, I've heard a lot of criticism about ACO, Ilham, Omar, and I'm looking at them and I wish that the others would have some of the muscle that they've shown in the past 2 years. And I think that they've been criticized because they've shown more guts than the others have. And I think that the other ones don't have the gusto that they have. And because of that, the other ones want to give derogatory remarks where it's not due. And if they had half of the chutzpah that they have, that we'd have a better representation in Congress and in the Senate.
Agree. I think though that they may get a lot of pushback, but they're so I find them to be very inspirational. And you have to remember that there's a whole generation of soon to be voters and one day voters who are watching them currently. And I don't think that they're going to be the only ones like them. I think there's going to be a lot more following them in the future. So that's one of the things that gives me hope going forward, is that we are seeing change. We are seeing people who have these excellent ideas and, strong ethics behind them, and that really seem to care about people over corporations. And I think in the future, that's going to be the norm. Is to hope.
We need that young voice. We need that voice with energy. There has to be term limits. Once you become disconnected from the people, You don't feel the needs of the people, you need to stay home. Retire, stay home. Because when you become so invested in stock market, in the people that control the stock market, and you don't care about people in the so-called ghettos of America, you don't care about those kids that are going to public schools that really aren't educating the children to the best of their abilities, when you don't care about the kids that are going to school hungry, you don't care about housing, you don't care about um, teachers that are qualified to be teaching in the schools. You don't care about healthcare because your healthcare is taking care of the very people that didn't want Obamacare. They have Obamacare. Then you need to stay home. I mean, I'm tired of that. What about younger generation? They must be more tired of that and tired of seeing hypocrisy on the Hill. It's got to change. And what's going to change it is term limits. You can't sit up there until you're 105 and pretend like you know what's going on.
I
It's
wonder
not
what
going to work.
operational definition of that is of connection. I wonder, and we don't have to do this now, obviously this is not really necessarily the time, but it's a really important conversation to think about, what does connection mean when we're connected to the people of the United States? What do we want that to look like? How do we know when people are disconnected? I feel like it's a little bit like we can call it, it's obvious because there are folks that just are, they're sitting in sort of an ivory tower.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ones that are the most outspoken and who are getting a lot of pushback are speaking on behalf of the people, and disrupting the status quo, which is why they're getting the pushback, right? That's the entire reason, is that they're speaking truth to power and making people uncomfortable. And that's
True.
what their job is, as long, is in the service of ethics. And so in addition to voting, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
discussing these issues with folks
Mm-hmm.
in this venue and others,
That's true, because you really can't compare Bernie Sanders with Mitch McConnell. No,
no,
you can't, because one is kind of reactionary and the other is kind of the force behind a wave of freedom. And the other one, I don't even know how he got reelected. I didn't see him campaign. I didn't see him at any speeches.
are we talking about McConnell?
Yeah, he just kind of appeared again. Every time there's an election, he just kind of appears.
He doesn't, but he doesn't just appear. He's getting elected because districts are gerrymandered, because places to vote are being eliminated, because people on the right are voting in large numbers, and because he has the connections to make it happen. And term limits is not going to solve that problem. It will help, but what we need is we need to actually educate, vote, mobilize, resist, so that people are ready and able and willing to embrace a more progressive future. And
there's one more R you forgot.
ignorance.
You forgot one more R.
Uh-oh, you just froze.
Oh, I froze?
Now I can, yeah,
I see you.
one more R.
Did you
One
just,
more R. Retire.
well, yeah, but
Retire him.
they're not going to retire on their own. We must retire them. We
Yeah.
have to do it. He's
Yeah.
not going to step down, because to him, this is not, and this is, particularly as a God squad. I mean, I loved your question, Maureen, about connection, because when we have leadership that's fundamentally disconnected to the humanity of those they are elected to serve, then we have to ask ourselves, like, how do we restore the connection? I mean, I would love to hear everybody talk about that, because to me, that's the absolute root cause of what we're seeing. It's a disconnect. it's fear and greed taking over because we don't have relationships with the people that we serve. There just isn't a sense of being beholden to each other. And that's a
Oh,
generalization, by the way, because there are millions and millions of people who are exactly the opposite, who work daily and diligently to really be connected and to make good decisions. So Mitch McConnell does not rule the roost.
Doesn't he?
No, he
Looks
has
like
more power than
he's
he
doing a
says.
really good impersonation then.
Well, we rule. We have the power. Yeah, not him.
When we collect,
Say what?
when we converge, when we
Correct.
connect. Yes, absolutely.
well, one of the other things I think that's really important is to detangle the financial aspect of it. Remove lobbyist ability, remove super PACs, remove big funders, all of these corporations, because they're overshadowing the voice of the people, right? Because you or I can go talk to our senators and representatives, and I do, and I'm sure it matters. They like to hear from people. But when you're looking at things on a grand scale, those big funds are really going to talk and make decisions. So there needs to be a way to remove that. And if we're talking about that from a religious basis, right, in Christianity, that's something that Jesus was really not happy about. He was not pleased with money being entangled with rights of people and politics and faith.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But does
Well-
that mean more in kind? I'm sorry, Kalila.
No,
More
no.
in kind. Well, I was thinking about this as it relates to the National Association of Social Workers and the American Psychological Association. Like as groups, as professional groups, I'm curious to know what we are, willing and prepared to do as groups to address some of the mental and public health crises, the mental health crises that have become public health crises. What are we likely to do about, the mental health needs of children at the border who've been separated from their parents at very tender ages? And I'm wondering about, the role of money in activism, because there is a need for money in activism, but there's also a need for in-kind or, professional contributions or, the contributions that come with coming together as a collective to do some of the work. And I'm thinking more about that in
Well,
2021 and how we might get past that with the pandemic, incidentally.
so if I remember correctly from my nonprofit years, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are legal restrictions on a nonprofit entity's ability to lobby and use funds in such a manner. But I do not believe that there are the same restrictions on wealthy individuals and corporations,
Interesting.
which creates an inherent disparity in terms of, yes, money matters and you need to be able to organize. Maybe there should be a limit to it, a ceiling in terms of it. But when you set up those kinds of disparities, your nonprofit organizations are the ones that are most likely to say, hey, we're speaking on behalf of, say, the children at the border, and we want to talk to you about mental health. And if they are restricted in the ways that they can lobby and the funds that they can use, their voice is not going to be heard.
No, actually, you can fundraise for to help reunite children with their parents. You can fundraise to help people that need mental health services to get the services that they need. You can fundraise to help feed children or families. You cannot fundraise to lobby politicians, things like that. But you can fundraise to give resources to the poor and for people that need, certain, food, shelter, mental health, care, things like that, but just not for politicians and for political power. It's hard to do. Fundraising is very hard to do, and we've never, like like myself, Mass Justice Center, we've never done that because it's just hard to do the work of defending the clients and advocating for them and fundraising at the same time. And when your organization that's primarily women, they it's actually they respect men and they give more to men than they give for women. Like we have women that are detained and really they're sexually abused, but it's hard to do that, you know, for some reason in this society, when men speak, their voices are respected more than the voices of women, and they donate to women, I mean to men, more than groups that are primarily have women that advocate. But I think that this, I hope that 2001 there will be a huge change, because the resources for women that are abused and for children that are also sexually abused, and not too many people know that there were so many children in detention centers that were sexually abused that will need mental health care for the rest of their lives because of the abuse, and also for the emotional abuse of being separated from their parents. And it happened on our turf, and we are responsible for them one way or another. And I hope that this country accepts responsibility and that we will gather resources and take care of these children and the adults. We owe them.
Right. Well, but that
Nothing's going to happen without major mobilization. They're not going to, our government is not going to acknowledge or rectify in the face of billions of dollars of privately run detention facilities or concentration camps that have been going on since Obama and before. They will not recognize and rectify their errors without massive public outrage. And by the way, nonprofits, according to IRS tax code, which is why our Sacred Circles, our organization is not an official 501c3, you can actually lobby as long as lobbying is not the majority of the work that you do. So it's a slippery slope. You have to, they have a very vague definition of what too much lobbying is. And you also can endorse candidates, but
Right.
there's a way that you can advocate. You can do it. You just have to be careful with the balance, because otherwise you risk losing your tax exempt status. Yeah.
And that dynamic that you're describing, Kalila, in terms of fundraising and providing direct outreach, that's done on purpose. That is the separation between government, private, and public partnerships is there purposefully. Because historically, a lot of the social services have been placed on churches and on religious entities in general, not necessarily just Christian. A lot of times because of the worldview of the faith perspectives in terms of outreach and caring for your neighbor and caring for the poor and all of those. But it does create a disconnect between government policy, funding, and caring for people in ways that are meaningful, and these nonprofits and social supports and churches and mosques and everything having to fund the difference and disparities in terms of how this works in people's lives. But that's very intentional.
Well, I know the last stimulus checks that many institutions, religious institutions that receive money, a lot of mosques did not want to apply because they were afraid to apply because the government would go after them. They were afraid to apply because they were afraid the government would go after them, thinking that the money went for terrorism. They would fall immediately under that umbrella of suspicion. And that's so unfair, because whenever it's an Islamic community, the first thought is terrorism. Whereas the man who blew up that city block in Nashville, no one called him a Christian terrorist. No one said it was an act of terrorism. Now, if he had been a Muslim, oh, it was an act of Islamic terrorism. That would have been the first thing in the news, the first thing to come out of Donald Trump's mouth, but the silence was almost eerie. There was nothing said whatsoever. They couldn't find an excuse, so no excuse was offered whatsoever. And it's so unfair to judge a person by his ethnicity or by his religion, to find an excuse based on what someone believes. And it goes deeper than that. It should go deeper than that. No one should be judged because of what they believe.
White male terrorism needs to be labeled as such, and
Yeah.
particularly white supremacist terrorism. I don't know if the Nashville Act was white supremacist. It strikes me very much as white male outrage, right? I don't know that it was part of a manifesto, but this was a person who was alienated and alone, and decided to take his rage out on others, and happened to be a white male. So white male
Yeah, but
terrorism is definitely a thing that we need to start talking about explicitly, I believe.
But that case in Michigan where they wanted to take the governor out of her house and behead her. Now, if that wasn't an act of terrorism, I don't know
Misogynistic
what
white male
was.
terrorism, 100%.
That
Well, and we
was
need to start having those conversations, because I don't know if you all noticed, but one of the narratives that they're now saying is, oh, he had mental health issues. His girlfriend tried to get him to see a therapist or psychiatrist. And it's really dangerous to frame acts of violence as a mental health concern, because the vast majority of people who have mental health issues aren't violent. And we can't frame mental health services in terms of violence. We need to be framing those in terms of issues of privilege and entitlement and rage and anger and violence.
right.
But
Well,
there's a
and it's so interesting.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rena.
Go ahead.
There's a
Well, I was just thinking, it's
you go ahead.
You go. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that when it's a white man who commits an act of terrorism, he's isolated, alone, a victim of his poor childhood. Like, we're always seeking reasons for why it happens. And of course, he's always acting in isolation. He's a lone horse. But as soon as somebody Black does that, or a person of color, then automatically demonized. He's a member of, we don't talk about mental health issues. We don't talk about his poor childhood. He's automatically guilty, demonized, all of that. So it is interesting that, white men get a free pass in a certain way, that automatically it's about mental health, which engenders some sense of compassion for someone who's not in their right mind. Whereas everybody else, of course, it's deliberate, calculated act of terrorism and often part of a group. I just find that discrepancy very interesting.
That's what it is. It's that part of a group that matters. So when you frame something in terms of a mental health issue, oh, it's that white man's problem, not the rest of ours, of course, because we don't have mental health issues, right? If it's a mental health issue, it's an individual problem and not a cultural problem. And that's exactly what you're seeing is with everyone else, everyone who's non-white, it's a group issue, whereas with whites, it's individualized. And that's why it allows the dominant structures in society to say, oh, but not us.
Right.
Maureen,
what were you saying?
The conundrum that I have with this is that I see it as both and. So it is, if alcohol abuse is a family problem, you've got one person with a substance abuse issue, an entire family full of people who are impacted with that. I see racism, sexism, white supremacy as cultural problems in a very large family system. So I come from an ecological systems perspective. Yuri Bronfenbrenner had this kind of idea that there was the individual and then the family and then the community and then the nation and then the world. And I see racism as the family problem of the United States. And so when we talk about narcissism and we talk about, mental health issues, we have to sort of, like, for me, we have to separate it from the individual mental health issue and the systemic mental health issue, which is a big deal. And I think that we can talk about the systemic mental health issue of racism and, you know, what some people refer to as toxic masculinity. That is the socialized disengagement and entitlement that men are socialized with, not an intrinsic part of masculinity, particularly white masculinity, like white femininity. Like these are things that it's the cultural context in which we're raised. And I do think that they're a form of delusion. And, you know, I think Ta-Nehisi Coates called it the beautiful dream. That if you are born in a position of privilege and you don't know that you're born in a position of privilege, then the rage that comes from having to justly share things that were never yours to begin with is part of a mental health issue, I think. And for me, I feel like I'm always trying to engender compassion for individuals. I don't believe that white men deserve any more compassion than a Black man. And I don't believe that white men need to be separated from their group. But for me, like making it a mental health issue is not about justifying the behavior. It's about contextualizing the behavior. We can't stop it unless we know why it's happening. It doesn't make it okay. So I have this real conundrum because on one hand, I've spent the majority of my adult life trying to contextualize people's bad behavior within a mental health framework. And yet there are these other kind of major forces at work that exist within ecological systems that are really meaningful, that I don't want to get lost in the conversation. I don't know.
So how would you describe a man that lost an election but refuses to accept that he lost the election and is enraged because the country refuses to give in to his temper tantrums?
I think Donald Trump is severely mentally ill. Severely mentally ill. More mentally ill than most folks that we've ever seen. Like there is a known contingency of narcissism and sociopathology within the corporate framework. There are people that are narcissistic and sociopathic who can channel that into destructive. It's inherently destructive, but socially somehow rewarded places. And Donald Trump is ill. He's been known as a kind of a malignant narcissist for decades. People have written books about him.
Right. But I think, you know, so just in terms of vocabulary, like having a working vocabulary that we all sort of have some common understanding. I mean, I do think that there are aspects of mental illness, which to me is profound disconnection, some of which is genetic, biological, cultural, all of that. But ultimately for me, racism, sexism, classism, at their root, they are socio-political and economic systems which maintain power of some over others on the basis of certain criteria. So for instance, racism is actually a series of systems which upholds white power and dominance, period. Like it doesn't mean there aren't mental health issues, but racism is a system. And I think the danger of sort of weighing heavily in this mental health arena, it's not to say that they don't have mental health issues, but it becomes a fish perspective instead of a lake, right? So in other words, Trump is a fish. The lake is white supremacy. And the fact that there are millions of people who uphold what he stands for and support what he stands for, some of whom are in positions of power and some of whom get screwed by him every day and are too ignorant to notice.
Yes.
There seems to be something, it seems to be something beyond that with him. There is something completely strange and more to it with him. The only thing that besides having that really mental illness component thing that I don't understand is why there are people submitting to it. I find it very strange that there are people around him. I mean, because basically he's a very ignorant man. He's not anything special. He's not intelligent. He is the biggest crybaby. He's not very well educated. Whatever education he's had, he's paid for. He's never really earned anything outright.
No.
He has no class. Why do people have a need to submit to his will? Before 4 years ago, he wasn't anything special. He happened to get elected president, and he probably stole that. So what is it that makes certain people dance to his music? It doesn't make any sense to me.
So the thing is, people give support to things that they feel are in their best interests. And frankly, like trying to analyze why people behave the way they do, I think in the if we're offering counseling or mental health services, I think this line of questioning about how come people value one person of another, it's like, I know why they do it, because they're bigots. It's not rocket science. Like, I feel like the analysis of why people behave the way they do, for me, only makes sense in a healing capacity as someone who's providing spiritual support, or if people are providing mental health support. Other than that, the bottom line is they support him because they think it's in their best interest. Period. So
I
for me,
really agree
I want to know, I want to focus on the solutions. I don't want to
No, but first, Maureen, I want to know why you think some people are stuck on stupid. I mean,
it's not stupid, it's self-interest.
Okay, let me hear okay, Maureen, give me your opinion. Why do you think certain people are stuck on stupid? Just give me your opinion.
They're not stuck on stupid.
I think that's complicated. I agree.
Let me hear what she has to say.
I agree with Rena's analysis that it's self-interested. I believe that we're all self-interested. I think that there are many of us who know that being connected to other people is in our best interests, and that our ability to succeed and be healthy in life is directly tied to the ability of others to succeed and be healthy in life. I feel strongly myself that my well-being is tied to the well-being of children that are incarcerated at the border right now.
Okay.
That I can't be at peace unless they're at peace, or at least that they're getting better, because I find it utterly atrocious that this is a thing that happened in my country under my government. I find it deeply disheartening. I think there are a lot of people that do not see beyond so going back to ecological systems theory, they don't see beyond themselves. They don't see beyond their family. They've never had a chance to open the box that they exist in with safety. And every time somebody tries to open the box for them, they push back on it. And so we need safety. People need safety in order to expand themselves. And so everyone acts in self-interest. There are some of us who see our self-interest as tied directly to the self-interest of others. And so the only way forward, I believe, is compassion, well, with also accountability. I think that those two things have to exist together.
And Katie, what do you think?
I think I am somewhere in between Maureen and Rena's perspectives. I think my answer would be that the dynamic that you are referring to regarding Trump and government officials and who's upholding him is something that's very much seen in certain domestic violence situations. And there is an aspect of self-preservation to that. So I think that part of it is self-preservation, maybe self-preservation more than self-interest, because I don't know that it always has the sort of negative, greedy connotation. I think sometimes it is a genuine fear. I also think that there's a level of cognitive dissonance, and that there's an aspect of issues like gaslighting, right? One of the things that we have seen Trump do is gaslight an entire nation. And anytime you introduce gaslighting into a dynamic, you start to make people question what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what's going on. And it literally is intended to create dependence on the person who is abusive. And when I watch what's going on in our country, I look at a lot of it through the lens of domestic violence and abuse dynamics. I think when you have that in a nation such as the United States, which historically and systemically does not focus on things such as empathy and groupthink and collective care, you really have a perfect storm for what we're dealing with right now. And I wish there was one simple answer in terms of, you know, people are just horrible or people are just stupid, but I don't think that's it. I really don't. As far as solutions, I think that what we're going through right now is necessary. I think it's a necessary part of the solution because so many people are now horrified at what has been there all along that's now being uncovered, that we have to go through this bit of, oh crap, what is this and how do we change it in order to actually want to change the systems that were there. And I do think that, you know, there has to be something that now teaches us how to care about our neighbors as ourselves, how to actually practice what our faith and worldview perspectives say are necessary. And that's a change. That is a change from social policies that start actually behaving in that manner. That is a change in our school systems that starts teaching empathy, that changes the way we discipline kids at home as well as at school. You know, there's introducing mindfulness and yoga programs instead of detentions in school is one way to reduce things like that. And we're not going to get there overnight. We're not going to be there overnight, and we're not going to get there by blaming people or calling them idiots. But I think we have to go through this. We have to take a look at all of those factors, and we have to give people space to be afraid. Because also as a nation, we don't like to show fear or weakness. And I think we're at a very vulnerable space right now where just about everybody is afraid. And I think we have to sit down and say, hey, I'm scared. And the people who are making decisions that don't make sense often comes from a place of hoarding resources because they don't think there's any more. So we have to start having conversations that say, I acknowledge the fear you're feeling. I acknowledge the validity of that experience. Now let's talk about why it's not accurate and how we can change things. That's my thoughts.
I also think we need to create, you know, I mean, this is something that we're looking into a lot too, is we need to create councils of people who are wise and gathering to become wiser through developing relationships and learning from each other and teaching each other. And we need to create structures in which people can awaken so that action will follow. I think it's, you know, I do think we do not educate children to be the critical thinkers that they need to be in this time. And in many cases, they're not given the information and the tools to become that. And I also think, though, that the secret is in the sauce of relationships. Like, I do think that the more we learn to be in relationship with each other, the less likely it is that we will develop and implement policies that don't serve everyone, because our well-being is connected to everyone else's. And I think, I don't know if it was Maureen, you said that, I'm not sure who, but that was a really awesome point. So how do we create structures in which people can actually learn to develop relationships and connections to teach and learn? It also involves a completely different paradigm of education, because our education is designed to maintain status quo. That's not all it does. It can sometimes engender creativity. There's a lot of good things that can come out of it. But by and large, our education system is not crafted for liberation. It's crafted to maintain existing systems and structures.
Very true. And Rena, if you're talking about how do we have people have a spiritual awakening, if we're connecting to social change to spiritual awakenings, if you think about it, in every major religious tradition, right, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, those spiritual awakenings only came about when people had time to slow down. We're going through a very difficult time, which really is where we are as a nation right now, right? We're both literally slowed down in our homes and going through crisis. And when they had time to pause, and when they had time to listen, when they had time to actually connect with God and hear the message that was coming. And I think society-wise, that's not something that we do very often. We don't slow down, we don't pause, we don't reflect, we don't, reach out for help, we don't engage in our emotions. And a lot of that, I think, is also the way that our system is designed. Because if you look at other countries, they have time to do things like that. They have time not to worry about where food is coming from, or not to worry about where childcare is being paid from, or not to worry about rent right now, right? We have an eviction crisis here, despite laws that say we're not supposed to, whereas every other nation is making sure people are housed. Like I fail to understand how that's even a question for a country to say, yeah, I don't think we're going to pay for their rent right now. I don't understand that. But if we're not going to give the people here that time to slow down and, trauma-wise, reduce the trauma responses, reduce the nervous system responses, and sort of connect not only with others, but also with themselves, I don't know that you're going to see that spiritual awakening very soon.
But how isn't that dependent on how you define spiritual awakening? Because that's subject to different interpretations. I mean, that's really spiritual awakening. That's defined differently. It depends on who you are. It depends on your set of beliefs. It depends on the way you express it. It's not going to mean the same thing to everybody. And the way that you practice it, it's not going to be the same way. Martin Luther King was different from Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela was different from Malcolm X. And Malcolm X was different from Che Guevara. Because Che Guevara was more of a revolutionary, that's not to say that he was not spiritual, because in many ways he was. So it depends on the person and their concept of what spiritual awakening is. But Che Guevara was very much on the side of the people. And so was Fanon. It really depends on your definition of spiritual awakening and how you react on what your definition is and how you challenge yourself to express it in your actions. So everyone's definition is not going to be the same.
But everyone you mentioned, they all had a common thread of spiritual awakening, which is that they came to an understanding, however they did it, that all people are connected and that the welfare of one depends on everyone getting taken care of. The spiritual awakening of every single one of those people had a deep underlying root system of interconnection, and also a sense that the most marginalized among us have to be protected and their needs have to be met, and that's a priority. Every one of those people.
But are you saying from each according to his ability to each according to his need? Because that's not exactly the way everyone thinks.
Right. Well, so that's when we're talking about awakening, and it's not, you can call it spiritual, you can use lots of words for it, because spiritual, I think, is really laden with a lot of judgments. And I like that you said that, like, it is different for everybody. Our practices are different. And I would love to hear from you, Kalila, like, how would you define spiritual awakening? Because I think my definition has to do with awakening and acting upon an understanding of intersectionality and deep connection that allows all the power to go to all the people. Like, everything is connected. We can't be awakened if our behavior does not promote equality and transformation of systems which don't allow for it.
My spiritual awakening is pretty simple. It's wanting for my brother what I want for myself, and striving to work to my best ability to give my brother the opportunities that I have for myself, and just doing my personal best to achieve that purpose, and encouraging my neighbor to do the same thing. And if my neighbor can't, then I will use my resources to help my neighbor to enhance his resources, so that we can all strive to make the society better. And caring about someone, not based on their color, not based on their looks, not based on what they have materially, is an element of my soul and my heart that makes me go beyond the superficial. And I strive to attain that goal. I strive to overcome what I've concluded is ignorance to achieve that value. And so that I train my children to achieve those same values, so that we look at the community as a family. So the family is just not the person that is a product of who you are. It's not a product of like your mother or your father, but your family is your neighbor. Your family is person who lives across the street. Your family is by extension who's around you. Your family is who you go to, who your children go to school with. So you look at your community as an extension of yourself. And so if you treat, if you want for your neighbor or your brother what you want for yourself, you treat that person as you would treat yourself. You treat that person with kindness and respect. And if that person should harm you, you try to establish that communication where that person will want to treat you as they would want to treat themselves. So it's just about mutual consideration and trust, and developing that atmosphere of peace despite what you believe, despite who you believe in, but just about a common value system that's fair. And it shouldn't be that hard. I don't know what makes certain people hate one another, but there seems to be some type of lack of communication that has developed as we've gone along. But if we can sort of manage some system of communication, I think we can get over it. And if enough of us have those values, then we can sort of put off those who don't in an intelligent way and make them come to the same understanding. Well, at least they cannot force their ignorance on us, but we can enforce a pact, at least, where we treat each other with some type of respect and dignity. I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like one of the things that binds the four of us together is the desire for connection, community, and healing, right? And our spiritual quest to pursue those things. I think the question that remains and will be continued, I guess we can continue through 2021 to sort of explore, is how do you heal what I would frame as injuries? We could call it ignorance. We could call it, I don't believe in evil.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that that's a thing. So when people are hurting other people, my assumption is that they are injured. That doesn't mean that we can let them continue to injure.
Mm-hmm.
We have to contain them. We cannot let people injure other people. But I also find that moral judgment doesn't do much for us,
Mm-hmm.
as far as dealing with the situation after the fact. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, how do we?
It's a,
Go ahead.
No, I
Sorry.
was going to say, I think the whole notion of evil, particularly looking in spiritual and religious traditions, we could, that alone we could unpack for a long, long time. I think one of the things, though, that I don't understand, and I think it's come up multiple times in our conversations, is why are we asking questions about, well, why is that person so mean? Why are they behaving? I don't understand why those questions keep coming up. And Kalila, I feel like they're coming up for you, like I'm hearing you say that a lot, like, well, what? So for me, I have a different understanding because I understand why I feel like I understand why they do it. It's not a mystery. It's not a surprise. And the reason why I have that understanding is because I'm rooted in historical, economic, and political analysis as well as spiritual perspectives. And I know you are too. So where's the disconnect that makes you need to ask that question? I feel like we're missing something.
Where's the disconnect? Because I just can't believe that somebody sat in a big White House and knowingly knew that there was a disease that would eventually let so many people die, and he didn't do anything. I just can't believe that a man put together a plan that would purposely separate children from their parents, isolate them inside little cells, and let them become thirsty and drink out of a toilet. I can't believe
why is
that a man would empower a police force to put their feet on the necks of people. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine that someone could be that damn cruel and that other people would just say, I'm sorry. Maybe I've been shielded from things, but I'm flabbergasted.
I don't see a disconnect between the two lines of inquiry, right? I think that asking, why do people do that? Why is this happening to me? Why is the world like this? Is a fundamental ethical, moral question that often leads people on paths to spiritual awakenings, social justice, social change, that kind of thing. And I don't really think you can have one without the other. What I think I've observed from our discussion so far is that, Rena, you've done a lot of that work already. You've asked a lot of those questions. You have the foundation for those, and you've come to a solid conclusion, which works for you, and it works for your worldview and the way that you're operating. And I think that's a huge strength. I also think, though, that, if we're having these chats, not only for ourselves, which, we know that the four of us are somewhat similar in terms of those foundational elements, right? But we're also having these for other people to be able to watch and observe and contribute and grow. And they're probably asking a lot of the same questions. So I think there's value to having some of those conversations, because other people then also get to go through the path in a way that's meaningful to them also. But I definitely don't see a disconnect between the two.
It's a function of trauma also. Why it's happening as a trauma response.
So that's the piece. Like, I know we're running out of time, but I think trauma, and if I'm left flabbergasted, then to some extent, in my experience, it renders me unable to respond because I'm left being flabbergasted. Like, I just don't get it. And so that's the piece that I'm interested in digging into next time. There's a difference between wondering, and then you do research, you get your grounding, you figure out the dynamics that are in play. But to be routinely flabbergasted and surprised about people's behavior when they've given you every indication that it's rooted in the same things over and over for 400 years, I don't see why we are surprised. That's
maybe because,
but the trauma, I think what you're saying about trauma,
because we have different experiences. We have totally different experiences. I mean, my experience is different from yours.
Right. I want to know about that.
When I went to the border to help some refugees come across, and I'm an American. For some reason, I thought that I was safe. I did not expect for Border Patrol to separate me from the refugees, to take me in a room and to bash my head against the wall, to handcuff me for 5 hours, to push, to shove, to kick me. I thought for some reason, in my mind, I thought I was exempt. I didn't expect for them to lie. I didn't expect for them to create a scenario that didn't exist. And I didn't expect for them to try to get away with it. And they probably will try to get away with it, just like they will get away with those children that they separated from their parents. And I realized that this is not the country that I thought it was. This is not the country that my father spent 30 years in the military serving. This is not the country that I grew up in a very nice neighborhood in West Los Angeles. I'm not the kid that went to UCLA. I'm not that person anymore. And I became a Muslim because I have freedom of religion, but now I'm a Muslim and I don't have freedom of religion. And so part of me, I don't know what to believe anymore. And I'm disappointed. I'm very disappointed because I've been taught one thing, but I've been treated differently. And so I wanted my children to have the life that I had. But I'm not sure that what I had was even real. And I want what was taken away. I want it back. But I don't know if it's ever going to come back. And I'm not sure that it even existed. So that's where I'm at.
Well, and everything that you're saying, and it's horrible that that stuff happened to you, and everything that you're saying helps me to understand, like, what feels like a disconnect is like, because we want to believe that everything is going to be okay, and we're safe, and that people are going to be just and loving, and that they're going to look after us, and they don't. And what do we do with that information? Like, how do we move on from there to make sure that that actually becomes the reality? And is that even possible? Like, those to me are huge and profound questions for us. That's, yeah.
And yeah.
So more to come next week.
Yes.
We will continue to do this work.
So I think, we should definitely wrap up in a way that feels like there's some closure. And I think one of the things that I witnessed in that video that we're sharing along with today's discussion is the overwhelming sense of resiliency and power of the human spirit. I loved that it was a global video, and it's something that I think is a common theme in humanity, is that regardless of where you are or what's going on or what your faith is or what your religion is that there is this innate sense of resiliency and, being able to overcome. And I think regardless of where you are currently, we've all demonstrated that, in our individual lives and collectively just by surviving to the last day of the year.
Who seeks not to